And we are just gonna ask you to please mute yourself so we avoid background noise. And again, for those just arriving, you can feel free to share in the chat where you're coming from, your name, um, what you're interested in, finding out more about, what you're working on, that kind of thing. And again, as we go, feel free to chime in with questions or comments in the chat, and then there'll be time for discussion at the end.
I don't know what you mean by share in the chat.
There's a section if you click on chat at the bottom or wherever your menu is in Zoom, and there's a place for you to write in messages to either someone directly or to everyone. All right, great. Well, we will get started. This webinar is part of the Co-op Clinic, which is a program of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. We do education and technical assistance as part of this program, and we have a peer network of advisors, folks who are in worker co-ops that can also advise people who are starting their own worker co-ops or looking to expand or get more resources for co-ops. So it's a great network that we are, cultivating and growing. And after this webinar, you can feel free to put in a request for consultation, and we can have a deeper chat about your situation, get you some resources, and maybe if there's a good fit, we can find a peer advisor that can work with you more in depth on a specific project. And we do other webinars on specific topics. We have one coming up on burnout. We do the startup webinar monthly. Next month it's in Spanish. If you know any groups looking for that kind of information, please feel free to share the information. So, so again, folks just joining us, please share in the chat who you are, where you are, what you're working on, what you're looking for, so we can get to know each other a little. And just wanted to start with a little in general about co-ops, right? There are generally three categories of co-ops. There's lots of ways of categorizing them, but this is one way to think about it. If folks are buying together, consuming together, that is usually called a consumer cooperative. You might be familiar with consumer cooperatives in natural food markets, food co-ops. That's often a consumer-owned cooperative, though there are worker-owned groceries as well. That can include housing cooperatives where people, own their collective house together. And then there are people who are selling and marketing together. And that is called a producer cooperative. So that's common in the agricultural scenario, especially. There's a very common cooperative form for agriculture. Many of you may know co-ops and not know they were co-ops, like Ocean Spray, where growers come together and they form a joint marketing brand or something like that. But not necessarily all the people picking the cranberries for Ocean Spray are member owners, that the businesses themselves are the members and owners of those cooperatives. Then there are folks working together, worker cooperatives. That's what we'll be focusing on today. And those happen in all sorts of workplaces: manufacturing, retail, service industries. All over the map, you'll see different kinds of worker cooperatives. And we'll be talking specifically about those today. And that's what our federation is specifically there to support. And then there are multi-stakeholder, so hybrids, types of cooperatives that mix these. For example, you can have a grocery store that has members that are the consumers, right? And then members that are workers, and you can have a joint membership or multiple membership classes. Those are called hybrid or multi-stakeholder cooperatives. But again, we'll be focusing on the worker co-ops today. Great. There's a multi-stakeholder co-op, platform co-op represented here today. And to get into why, people come together and start worker co-ops, many are looking for good work, fair pay, job security, and because they want the broader community to have some benefits. And a really, thriving worker co-op can have all of these aspects. Some may emphasize one of these aspects over the other, start for, because they really want to emphasize the good work that they feel, dignified in their workplaces, and then also bring along these other components. And when we talk about worker ownership and worker cooperatives, we have both of these components, both the joint ownership and financial benefit, financial risk and reward. So that's people, investing in a membership fee, uh, and then there's profit sharing, which we call surplus in a co-op. And then there's also the other component, which is democratic ownership, democratic control, shared decision making. So members have decision making power at the most fundamental level of the cooperative. That could be in major decisions as a collective, or that could be electing a board of directors. Um, and so you may have one of these and not the other in other kinds of entities. So like an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, might have employee ownership, right? But maybe it doesn't have the democratic decision-making power or the joint governance that a worker co-op has. Or you might have a nonprofit that has democratic decision-making power. It could be a staff self-directed nonprofit, and it has the democratic component, but it doesn't necessarily have the joint ownership component. But we're talking today about worker cooperatives that have both of these components. And just to give folks a sense of how money flows through a cooperative, this is not to overwhelm anyone, but this is what we call the internal capital account system. And it basically is a way so that the members in a cooperative can retain the earnings, allocate them individually, so people build up wealth and reap the rewards of their hard labor, but can use it in the cooperative without it being double taxed. So let me just walk you through it a little bit. So you have surplus, which is like the profit, right? Your net surplus, and you have the amount that's generated from the members. So you take that away from the other parts that might be generated from non-members, folks who are uh, have not yet become full members in your cooperative, for example. And uh, some of that surplus will go to a collective account, and you'll pay corporate tax on that, right? You'll pay collective tax. And then some of it you can allocate to member patronage. So patronage is how much someone works in the cooperative, in a worker cooperative. That's the most standard way of calculating the patronage. And when you have that member patronage, you say the board or the full membership decides this amount is going to member patronage. That means it's going to individuals. And then you have another decision-making point. How much goes to individuals in cash for that year that they can take out right away? And how much goes into an individual capital account? And that capital account is theirs, but it stays in the cooperative. So you can use that equity as you go. So it's just a great mechanism to allow for internal investment without having the double taxation. And you have to have some cash paid out so that people aren't stuck with a tax bill without getting any funds, usually a minimum of 20%. And that's called subchapter T, right? If you're using that IRS code, um, and you don't have to know all these details. If you're starting a co-op, there are great accountants out there. There are bookkeepers that can help you set this stuff up. But just so you know that this mechanism is available to cooperatives, and it's a great tax benefit. Um, so a little bit about the co-op movement, the worker co-op movement. There's probably 800, maybe close to 900 now worker co-ops if you count, folks in startup phase. Um, and there are 475 verified worker co-ops, and over 300 of them are members of our federation. But it's hard to track the exact number, but they're all over the country in all sorts of sectors and industries. Um, and it's a growing movement. We're small compared to other cooperative sectors, but it's growing, and there's a real commitment to the movement. So so when we're thinking about worker cooperatives, we talk about the shared decisions, democracy in the workplace, right? We also talk about prosperity. So the wealth that's generated through our enterprises, that's shared. And then we talk about community. This is something that we are, have a mission underlying our enterprises, and we have a shared vision and culture, or we're working towards that at least in our co-ops. So you might be stronger in one of these areas, but again, a worker co-op, has all of these components built into it. And so what does this look like? It looks like people who are organized democratically, they're making democratic decision making, they're using democratic decision making in practice. Um, and they are owning and running a profitable enterprise. And this business also benefits the community, right? There's something uh, that is underlying it that is beyond the profit motive. And so let me just give an example of that. There's a great um, composting collecting cooperative in Boston called Cero, and they started uh, because of the need in the community for both strong good jobs for folks formerly incarcerated folks, BIPOC community members, and they also saw the need in the community for composting and waste rendering in a way that's regenerative, and climate uh, issues were core to their considerations. Um, and now they're running, a successful business that and own a whole fleet of trucks um, and make complex decisions altogether. So and they're benefiting their members, who are building wealth in the cooperative, but they're also benefiting the community in that service that they provide. And there's many examples all over the country for that. So just to touch briefly on conversions, when we talk about a conversion, we're talking about an existing business that has a different structure, usually a traditional structure, and converting it into a cooperative. Um, and this transformation to worker ownership it can be, a messy, emergent, kind of natural process going from the caterpillar to the butterfly, right? And in that transformation, there can be, quite a bit of fundamental change, right? You're going from something that was structured in a very traditional sense into something that is worker owned. Um, but the result can be something really beautiful. It can retain the legacy of that company. Um, but there's real work on joint culture and governance and decision making that has to happen in that change. And there are two main ways we see these conversions happening, where owners are looking to grow and share ownership and they stay in the cooperative as it converts, or as a succession strategy for retiring owners, right? There are so many folks looking for succession strategies that will sustain their company, and selling to the highest bidder may not be the right way to go for them, for preserving their legacy, for tax incentives, for a multiplicity of reasons. So there is some overlap, um, with the startup. So and the conversions. So if you're looking at a conversion, there might be some stuff useful today, but we're focusing on startups today. Um, but there are a lot of resources out there for conversions. Becomingemployeeowned.org has a great toolkit. So we're going to be looking at three different areas that the co-op entrepreneurs can be focusing in. So if you start thinking about your team, where you're strong, where other folks in your team are strong, where other people that you're looking to bring into your team could bring their expertise, and we're going to be talking about these three different areas, right? Co-op capacity development. So that's the internal culture and meetings and frameworks. And then the business development. So the more traditional entrepreneurship kind of work, creating value for your business. And then the ecosystem development, making sure you're connected with other communities. And so we'll be diving into each of these categories, but this is just one way to think about where people in your team can focus their energies as you get going in a startup. So for the first one, co-op capacity, um, when we're thinking about how to create a co-op, it, from the very beginning to try to figure out a way for the team to collectively work together in an effective way, right? So sharing the team vision and really working on a joint vision together, thinking about who's a member and who's not going to be a member, what kind of decision making do each membership class, if you have multiple classes, have, or who is eligible to be a member. And then as we get started with our founding steering committee or team, like how is the work delegated and how is the accountability systems, how are they set up from the very beginning? So building this shared vision is a key component, and it's a challenging one, especially if there's one or two people that come with a really strong vision and background and passion for the kind of work that the co-op's going to be doing. And yeah, it can be a challenge, but it's a worthwhile challenge to really think about how to move past that lone genius and to move into a group. And almost always the shared result of the larger group, having ownership and having contributions to that vision can be something really stronger. And then you have to meet regularly and have a consistent agenda and having ways of taking notes and following up. So let me give an example of a worker co-op I was part of starting, and I'm a worker owner of Future Focus Media Co-op here in Central Massachusetts, Worcester. We were a bunch of independent media makers, and we had some overlap in our vision to do, work on media production for the community and to do youth training. And we came together and we were able to complement each other's expertise. My coworker had expertise in photography, and I had a documentary filmmaking background. And we kind of complemented our work and were able to do multiple youth trainings and bring uh, teenagers as worker owners of our cooperative. But we had to figure out where was our joint vision and really elaborate that together over many meetings and some facilitated sessions. Another example is this great group of farmers, immigrant farmers, that found each other doing work through a worker center in the Pioneer Valley, Massachusetts. They're called Riquezas del Campo, and they came together and also formed that joint, vision. Okay, are we going to be growing our individual crops? No, we're going to be doing multiple vegetable production all together, and we're going to share tools and equipment, and we're going to get these resources and set up our own rules. So, there's examples all over, but that process of going from an individual idea into a shared vision is an important early stage. And then it is important to have clarity on what membership means, right? Expectations of what's a founding member's expectations, and then what's a member ongoing in the cooperative. What are their roles and responsibilities going to be? And it is important to ask for real contributions when you're setting the fee, for example, to set something that is a significant contribution from the folks you're envisioning being member owners of your cooperative. There can be payout over time. There can be getting member loans to cover those fees as members pay it off. But that shared risk is important to then have the shared reward and to really think about who's in, who's out of the cooperative. Let's look a little bit more about these rights and responsibilities. So we talked about financial participation, right? That's a membership fee, that's patronizing, that's doing work. So those are your rights, right? You have rights um, to patronize and get dividends from your work as the profit sharing, right? And then there's responsibilities that you will provide labor, that you'll have some budget oversight. And if there are losses, that some of those might be, individually out of the equity that you're building in the cooperative, that might be some of your responsibility too. Education is one of the principles of cooperatives and is a key component. So you have a right to educational opportunities to grow as a member of the cooperative. You also have the responsibility to educate yourself so you know what the governance processes are and things like that, and to educate others, right? And that's really about building leadership, right? Um, and then governance, when we talk about governance, you have the right to vote, to run for the board if your co-op has a board. You have the right to make major decisions in your cooperative. You also have the responsibility to participate in that governance and to participate in what is often called autogestión, right? Which is the idea that's self-management, self-governance, but in a way that really balances your individual interest with the collective interest of the cooperative. Um, and there's also, important component is information sharing in the cooperative. What are the bylaws? What are the policies? What are the books looking like? Um, so all of those components are important to share and to have, you know, clear processes for that information sharing. Um, and there are many more. It's important to build these rights and responsibilities for your co-op as they pertain specifically to your co-op. And this is just an example of a starting place. And then there's the figuring out how to really delegate the work. You may be one of the main entrepreneurs and ready to take on a lot of the tasks, but it is important from early stage to delegate, to find tasks that are really empowering for each core member as you get started. Uh, and some of it's going to be challenging, and you're going to have to step outside your comfort zone in some places, or ask other folks to do the same, but really think about other ways that each person can contribute in your team, so that this person, right, that's doing the first section is thinking about that for the whole team, for yourself and for the whole team. And they're hopefully helping you set up systems of accountability. So you're giving tasks, due dates, you check in on those tasks at each meeting, and you celebrate when you get things done. And if they're not getting done, you check in with the person and figure out what's going on underneath. Do you need more information? Do you need more access to this or that? Are there too many tasks on your plate, and do we need to redistribute them? Um, this accountability, if you don't have this early on, it can be a real challenge. As an example, a fictitious one, but it could totally be real. Um, we will talk about Llama Pepper Farm Co-op. They started and they were just so excited about having their llamas and their hot peppers that they just dove into the work, right? But they noticed they didn't have very clear roles. They were dropping important tasks because they didn't have very good systems. So they took a step back. They said, okay, we're not growing our pepper fields anymore this year. We're not expanding our operation. We're going to focus on some governance. And they decided to set up good systems of accountability. They created a grievance system, so someone was not so happy about their coworker, there's a way to express that in a productive way. They figured out how to suspend one of their own workers, right? You're all workers in this. How do you suspend yourselves or each other? They figured out some mentorship, and they had really good systems of task tracking too. So they had much better meetings. They were happier. They not only produced more peppers the next year, their llamas were happier. They were happier. They had a much more successful co-op. So important not to let that slide too late. I've seen that in many startups, that before you know it, you have really bad meeting habits. So that's that first area, in your team, the co-op capacity development, right? They're building the team, these internal structures, accountability, that kind of thing. We're going to dive into the business development one, the second one, B, where this is maybe someone has a business development background. Maybe they've started other businesses and really know how to create value, figure out the legal situation, raise startup capital, figure out the management structure, which is different than the governance structure. We'll be talking about that too. And so, this business development person should be someone who can really think about the value that your product or service is creating that fills a niche somehow in your market, right? We often are reacting to exploitation in previous workplaces, and we focus on just doing the work we love, but we also have to have a strong business plan. We also have to really have a clear product or service that fills the need, that meets an unmet need or a challenge in the area, in the industry that you're working on, right? So there are great tools out there for small businesses that are applicable to co-ops too. Value proposition, business model canvases. We'll send out some of these tools in the follow-up email. You'll get that Monday. Um, but this area is really important, that someone's really thinking about maintaining the the financial viability of your enterprise, right? So who really understanding your target customers, what do they need, what challenges, what unmet needs do they have, and how is your product or service meeting that need that's not already met? So this is a basic concept in business startup, but it's a key one that you have to have someone really looking at and improving and getting feedback you know on this, doing some market research, that kind of thing. This is important part of the business planning. So, and then this person might be looking at the right legal entity for you. First of all, why do you form a legal entity? Uh, as a protection from personal liability. You don't want all of your personal assets or your personal liability on the line when you're doing this joint enterprise. You want to have a corporate entity, a limited liability company or a corporation or a cooperative corporation or some sort of entity that can hold the 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 risk jointly, this liability jointly, and do the finances and taxes and all that. Many folks start up, as a partnership or a sole proprietor kind of situation, and they find, they're bringing people in the team, but they're carrying all the tax liability. Well, as soon as you can, feel ready to start your legal entity and collectivize that component, it's important. So, um, yeah, there plenty of folks use corporations. Uh, uh, a dozen or a couple dozen states in the U.S. have a specific cooperative corporation. Some might be very agricultural focused. Some might have a specific worker cooperative corporation or employee cooperative corporation statute. And if you're working in multiple states, you might want to consider that. Which state has a really good statute that works for our structure? Um, are we going to be a partnership LLC or an LLC that's taxed as a corporation? You want to start thinking about these questions and then bring it to a lawyer to get those kind of things solidified. And there are lots of lawyers around the country that are familiar with worker co-ops, and we can connect you with those resources when you're ready. But you want to answer a lot of questions internally first too. What's the cost to join? How will profits be divided? Do we need outside investors? Typically a co-op is self-funded from the folks joining, paying a membership fee that gives you some startup capital, or you get a loan. But there's other ways of getting equity that we'll be talking about later. Well, right now, let's talk about that. Let's talk about raising capital, um, because uh, so reaching out to a co-op lender is great because shared capital cooperative, for example, works nationally and they just lend to co-ops. So they know that structure. They're not going to ask for individual guarantees or credit scores. They're going to want a really strong business plan. They're going to want to show, they're going to want you to show that you're connected to the cooperative movement, and that you're reaching out for support. Um, and they may ask for some collateral. That means if you're lending something and the loan goes bad, something that they can take those assets and sell them and get back some of their funds that they've lent. But but it's less likely to be an extractive situation. There's lots of flexibility from these cooperative lenders. If you're in New England, the Cooperative Fund in New England, there are seed commons lenders all over the country. So, if you're looking for a loan product, there's capital out there for cooperatives. If you have a really strong business plan and you're ready for that, reach out for that. And then there is equity from the outside. You can get investors in a cooperative. Corporations might be set up better for this. Cooperative corporations have this in many states. But it's important to note that this is non-voting investor. If they're not a member, working at your cooperative, they're not going to have a veto power or, a voting share. They may have a share in your cooperative and an equity stake in the cooperative, but not a voting one, because it's important for workers to have that autonomy and full decision making. But you have to be very careful if you're looking into this around securities laws. So really suggest you talk to a tax or legal professional if you're looking at for that kind of investor equity. And just a word to the wise to not let, one or two members put all the debt on their credit cards with high rates and individual risk instead of that collective risk, right? And those co-op lenders and folks can really help you develop the financial component of your business plan and connect you to other resources. So there's a great community of that out there. We'll be sending some of those. See, there's yes, limited cooperative associations are another form that's important to mention. Someone mentioned here in the chat, right? Some states have these as well, so they're kind of the mix of LLCs and cooperative corporations, and they have benefits for each of those. So yeah, consider that. And then this person might also help you. This kind of business aspect person will think about this collective management, right? Or governance or traditional hierarchical management. Co-ops can have a hierarchical management system or a very collective one, but the governance is a separate situation. So governance is like decision making, kind of board level decisions, strategic planning. Um, who makes decisions, who can come in or is removed, who are your board and officers, and that kind of thing is all governance, right? Management and operations are a different situation, and you can set that up in multiple ways. You can get creative, and you can have committees that are empowered to work in different ways. There are lots of folks using sociocratic or holocratic structures in cooperatives. And you really want to think about a structure that works for your business, and have systems of accountability within that too. So that's the business development, right? They're setting up the governance and management and finding value, finding the legal entity, figuring out ways to raise startup capital. So and then there might be a third member of your team or a few people who focus on the ecosystem development. This is, creating the better environment for your co-op to do well. This is looking for technical assistance. Where can we find a co-op developer that can come and help us work through a lot of these questions and share best practices and tools with us? Where can we connect with social movements? Where can we get customer feedback early on? And if there's government support. So technical assistance, you may have a lot of expertise on your team, but there may be areas that you're also looking for. It's very rare that someone's expert in everything here. So co-op developers have really shown that they're really good at the democratic process components, right? Setting up the democratic management processes, helping you think through early questions about your governance. Before you go and finalize your bylaws, it's best practice to try to connect with a co-op developer. And that's something we can help you with the Federation find the right, fit. And there's a lot of free business support out there, maybe small business development centers or universities that have business students that can work with you on an aspect of your business plan. And those are often generic for uh, small business work. And that is half of the work of starting a cooperative is getting your business plan together, your financial projections that really aren't that different from another small business. So look for those areas of support too. And we do have a directory on our website, usworker.coop, service provider directory. And you can search by state. Uh, the University of Wisconsin also has a listing of worker cooperative developers that they have on their website. So you can check both of those and see, who's in your area. You can also look there to see who are lawyers that are familiar with co-ops in your area, or bookkeepers or accountants. Um, and again, we run a program at the US Federation that is the Co-op Clinic, and we can help you get connected to these resources. So after this session, after this webinar, you can have a free 30-minute specialized intake and get some resources. Um, so connecting to social movements, this third category, person or people, can think about how does your co-op connect to broader movements out there for justice and sustainability. And um, your co-op can be a catalyst for that change. You can really be involved and supporting, and that may be on many of your minds here starting a cooperative. But you also have to think about, how do you hire to sustain that mission, right? How do you make sure that folks coming in share that and continue that aspect of the vision? um, and if you state that you are, uh, part of your mission is to work on climate justice, for example, then you have to be accountable and really fulfill those promises for social change. Um, and there's some great examples around the country of folks doing this, right? There are several co-ops in Jackson, Mississippi that are part of Cooperation Jackson that are starting in a very intentional way that's linked to Black liberation work that's been going on there for many, many years. New Era Windows Cooperative in Chicago, um, making windows and doors and having worker ownership and union participation and migrant justice components. Um, Design Action Collective that does work for a lot of the social movements. Designing the graphics that you've seen around with from BLM logos to all sorts of important, beautiful artwork. Um, so it can be in the work, it can be in your structure, it can be in your movement orientation, but think about how to connect to those social movements. And we have member councils, which is a great place to plug into that at the US Federation. We have a Racial and Economic Justice Council. We have Movimiento de Inmigrantes en Cooperativas, the migrant worker co-ops, policy and advocacy, so to get involved in the policy work in your area. So that's one way to kind of connect into some of that. Um, and we also have a Union Co-ops Council. Uh, think about being a worker co-op and being unionized. Maybe that doesn't sound uh, come naturally to everyone. Why would you need a union if you're a worker owned? Well, there's benefits to doing that. It's an additional layer of protection for the workers, but you also can get resources, experience with grievance processes, discounted health insurance, pension, labor agreements, all that kind of stuff can come through the union. And then once you're involved in it, you can have a better impact in your industry or in your area through that organizing power that it means to be part of the labor movement. So they're not mutually exclusive. You don't have to be either a union shop or a worker co-op, and there are plenty of union worker co-ops. And there's great examples, inspired by the workers' councils in Mondragon, which is a large worker cooperative in Basque region, Spain. And Mondragon is working with the United Steelworkers, and there's lots of other co-ops and unions working together. One worker, one vote, with numeral one worker, one vote is a great resource for that. Cooperative Home Care Associates in New York City is a great large worker co-op in the US that's also organized with SEIU. Co-op Cincy has that strategy in all their cooperative development they're doing in Cincinnati. Um, and so there's a lot of great work around that if you want to involve unions. And then this third person who's building the networks and systems, right, might also get commitments from customers and early input, getting that feedback or pre-sales, selling coupons, getting contracts from an anchor institution like a hospital or university. Um, that could be a great growth strategy for your cooperative. Fulfill the needs of a large institution in your area that's not going anywhere, that has a mission, right, to support local entrepreneurship and job creation. Well, get in there, get at the table, try to get those anchor institutions to purchase from your cooperative, or even pitch in to build your cooperative. Um, and then you might do polls or surveys or forums or focus groups, getting the social media going and getting that feedback from the customers, right? And then this person might be thinking about how to align your co-op with government goals, right? Are there specific incentives to build enterprises in these neighborhoods? Are there workforce development funds that are out there for any small business, but as a worker co-op, you're especially a great candidate because you're not only building jobs, you're building dignified work and ownership opportunities. So check those out. And then, so those are the three main areas where you might want to think about when building your team. And I also want to mention that it's so important to think about equity and people's identities as you build this core team, right? I want to share an example again from my worker cooperative in a media cooperative. Um, all the other members were BIPOC getting started. We had a great age diversity, but we didn't have very good gender diversity. There were no women or um, gender nonconforming folks or trans folks on our forming, our steering committee, our initial group, and then it became quite challenging to incorporate uh, gender diverse folks, women, into the cooperative. There were dynamics that we as cis men were perpetuating, right? So if we had been more intentional about before starting to make sure to look at all the aspects of equity and identity, we would have had a much stronger cooperative and been able to grow and fulfill our mission better. So think about all these aspects. Which areas are you strong in? Which areas are you going to need help in? Form your team intentionally. Remember equity as you go. Um, where do you start? There's so much to do, right? This is not to make folks overwhelmed, but to inform you that there are many aspects to starting a cooperative. And you may have some strength in one area and looking for other folks to support you, either in your team or the supports from outside, like we mentioned, co-op developers, technical assistance providers, other business support systems. Um, and then, so again, to think about, like, the co-op capacity person might be great at the group processes, the decision making. The business development person loves spreadsheets and has started another business. Um, the ecosystem person is connected to the local movements, the regional movements, national stuff, can mobilize allies, can go out there and ask people to support. And you can play on your strengths, but you also will need to look for where you need to find support. Um, so again, this is just another way to look at it. Communications, internal workplace democracy, the business development, and then the broader community. So as we wrap up, start thinking about your questions, and especially questions that are um, useful for larger communities, other folks on this call. Um, and think about, be great for folks to share where they're at in their team building, right? What challenges have they found as they start to try to connect with others that are, share the interest in the business that you're looking to start, um, and what successes you've had. Just to share a little bit more about our federation, um, we are, the grassroots federation for worker cooperatives. We organize with worker co-ops across the country to create better policy and do advocacy for local uh, legal and resource development. Um, and we also provide member benefits around health related benefits. You can get access to great vision and dental plans if you become a member. Um, there's a startup membership that's just a $250 flat fee for the full year, and you get access to discounts on events, trainings, resources, the technical assistance, the program that I'm working with, the co-op clinic. You can get access to a free hour of technical assistance and resources. Um, and as we think about all the work that you know people are doing in their local areas or through the federation to support this movement of worker cooperatives, as we talk about rights and responsibilities, that responsibility to also kind of be involved, do the advocacy, vote for the leadership of our federation, make peer networks happen in your industry, right? There's a lot of people interested in cannabis industries, but we need to have people to step up and create that peer network, right? We have a great peer network um, in farming and tech co-ops, and you can make one happen in your industry too. Um, and so check out membership there, get involved, or just find resources at our website too. Here's another area to kind of look at for resources. Sustainable Economies Law Center, the SELC, has a lot of good stuff. Cooplaw.org or theselc.org, one word, theselc.org. And they have a lot of great stuff on worker cooperative legal statutes and bylaws and operating agreements, and those worker self-directed nonprofits. They have legal cafes you can go and bring your questions to. Um, the Democracy at Work Institute is like our sister organization here at the national level that creates a lot of great resources and supports the community of practice of developing cooperatives. Um, and of course, our website, usworker.coop/resources, has a lot of good stuff too. So there's a lot online, free resources. Make sure you dive into a lot of that, and we can also help you get pointed to the specific ones that are useful for your situation. This is a new one that just came out, a great resource for democratic management. It's a long, hefty publication, but it's really well indexed with activities that you can do to how to run better meetings and do open book management and things like that. So that's free for download at institute.coop/publications, and it's right there. It's called the Democratic Management Guide. Um, so check that one out, just hot off the press. Um, and then we have some upcoming events. We have another policy pulse. I didn't update the date there, but we have one coming up in May as well. You can find it on the website at usworker.coop. And we have a webinar uh, next month in Spanish, and again in July in English. If you have other members of your co-op or know other folks who would benefit from this webinar. And we have a membership meeting. If you're joining, you could participate in that at the end of May, May 26th. So heads up on those. And then if you enjoyed this, consider becoming a monthly sustainer. We rely on folks chipping in. So, at this point, I want to open it up we have lots of time for questions, comments. Feel free to unmute yourself and share it, or share it in the chat. Um, and I'm going to stop my share, spotlight. Um, and yeah, Feel free to share questions in the chat or unmute yourself and chime in.
I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
Can we get copies of these slides that you went through?
Yeah, this will all be emailed out by Monday with a bunch of additional resources. So we'll have a recording of this, the slides, and a bunch of other resources that will be sent out to you. And included in that is a link to request technical assistance. So you can book a half-an-hour session with us where we figure out specifically for your co-op, what you need, where we can connect you. Maybe we can set out a scope of work with one of those peer advisors, that kind of thing too.
Thanks.
I'm seeing a comment here about that multi-stakeholder or a co-op with multiple classes of membership and the creative legal ways that you go about making that happen. And I would say figure out what kind of members you want, what kind of decision making you want them to have, and why you want them to be members, not just subscribers or that kind of thing. Um, you know, what kind of patronage are they offering? Are they doing work? Are they consuming? Um, and what kind of financial benefit do they get from that? So figure out what you really want and what makes sense for your co-op, and then bring it to a creative co-op lawyer that we can help you connect to, and they will help you set up those structures, right? If you come and say, what's possible in the legal arena, you could get guided in a way that doesn't make sense for you, or you could just be overwhelmed with all the different possibilities. So I really encourage you to think about what you want, what makes sense. You may need to be flexible to meet the kind of statutes that are out there or in your area, but most of the time you can find a way. And like was mentioned in here, Laura mentioned, you can find multiple tiers of LLCs that own components of own other LLCs to make multiple stakeholders have real ownership. Or you can go for a very straightforward employee cooperative corporation and do it as the statute says. There it really depends on your situation, but don't get too bumped around from accountant to lawyer to this is possible, no, this is possible, well, this is the statute. Figure out what you want, go and say, how do we make this happen? And hopefully those lawyers can and accountants can help you do that. Yeah, Chuck.
Have you been, or are you aware of anybody that has combined a worker cooperative with a benefit corporation?
Yes, there are some co-ops that that have used benefit corporation statutes, not to be confused with B Corp, which is a certification that a co-op could go for, any entity. So benefit corporation, is a legal statute in many states. And yes, I know of one in Western Massachusetts that's used that statute. And there's ways of doing that for sure. Yeah, it's less about the legal entity and more about how you have your governing documents in place. Who are the members? Who's sharing in the profits? Who are making decisions? Who can run for the board? Do you have autonomy? Those kind of questions will say to the IRS for subchapter T, or to the movement organizations that consider you a cooperative or not. That's really the determining factor. So yes, benefit corporations can be used. Even S corporations are used in certain circumstances, but not very frequently.
Thanks.
Yeah, anyone have any comments or questions around the team building component? That's really important early stage, work as you're forming, you're going from idea into practice as forming your team. Any thoughts on that or questions?
Actually, can you hear me?
Hi, Julius, we can hear you.
Hi, yeah. So I had a question about the distinction you made between governance and management. And I think I understood the difference, but I feel like there's a lot of overlap there as well. And you had it sort of in two separate almost under two separate people. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about those differences and how that might play out more practically.
Yeah. So again, governance is about who's making decisions, the overall strategy of the cooperative. You may think of like a board having, their main role is on governance of an entity, whereas the staff or management, um, is thinking about the operations, the business operations, the day-to-day kind of decisions, less on the policy or long-term decision-making structures. Yes, of course, there's overlap, especially if you're in a collective situation, right? If you're an LLC partnership where everyone's on the board, that's a great structure and works for many co-ops. But even in that structure, it's important to have specific meeting agendas that are dealing with governance and policy and long-term kind of decisions. And people know that that's the kind of decision going, that's happening in those meetings. And then, maybe your weekly staff meeting that's dealing with operations, that's dealing with, your marketing plan and your sales and quality control and that kind of stuff. So um, it's yes, there's overlap, but as much as you can distinguish when you're setting up your meeting agendas, when you're setting up your policy documents, right? Your bylaws can refer to other policy documents, but shouldn't include all sorts of things that is more on the operational end. It should be a straightforward document. Your bylaws or operating agreement should be a straightforward document about how you set up decision making and member rights and responsibility, member uh, decision making and if you have a board, how that's structured, how that's elected, how people are removed from your co-op, which is a big component, setting up systems of conflict and mediation. You may have some of that in your bylaws, but you should have a full policy about preventing conflict, about dealing with conflict when it comes up, not if it comes up, when it comes up in your cooperative, having grievance procedures that can effectively deal with issues. So yes, there's overlap, especially in that kind of um, area of creating policies, of setting and when you create a governance structure and you're creating your management structure, they should be complementary. And there's some that go together, but they could be quite different. You could have a very horizontal governance structure. Everyone could be on the board, and then you could have a very vertical or hierarchical uh, operations and management structure if that's what your industry requires or what you decide to do in your cooperative. So yeah, like some landscaping co-ops, for example, say, we're on the job site and there's clear roles, right? There's a site crew leader and they're organizing things and really giving us direction what we do. But then we're back in the boardroom and we're all making decisions as equals. That site supervisor has no more decision making than me as a other board member of our cooperative or collective member of our collective. So,
I got a question.
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Eric.
How many members would be like too many members for a board?
The best practice out there is a pretty big range, but it's usually 3 to 15 is what people most folks say, both in the kind of nonprofit structure and co-op structures and small business structures too. So thinking about that core group of 3, you can start a cooperative with 3 folks. Some circumstances 2 if you really need to, but best practice is 3 or more folks. And then yeah, if you're forming your steering committee or the minimum and maximum of your board, 3 to 15 is usually best practice. More than 15, it's hard to have consistent attendance and information sharing and commitment to the strategy and governance work. And less than 3, it, is challenging to really share collective power. So somewhere in that range, and many start with 4, 5, 6, 7 steering committee members, and many keep a board around that size. You know, most worker cooperatives have a statute that says the majority of our board members are worker member owners, right? And that's kind of a principle that you're governed by the member owners. But you can have outside members on your board. They can be voting or non-voting, and they're often elected by the membership, but they can bring expertise that you don't have in your membership, right? You can have an accountant join your board. You can have someone who's very plugged into aspects of your industry sitting on your board and supporting with strategy and governance.
Thank you.
So feel free to unmute yourself and
Oh,
share.
sorry,
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn. Yeah.
Is a board the same thing as a steering committee?
So usually we talk about a steering committee as a group that before an entity forms, you're not an official legal board, but you are the group that is holding things together. You could call it a core group or a steering committee. And then you formalize the board when you incorporate the enterprise, the legal entity, and corporations are required to have a board or cooperative corporations, so that you form the board. And it could be that steering committee is most often becomes that founding board, and you could have things in your agreements that say founding board members have these rights or these additional benefits for all the sweat equity that they put in. They can be compensated in year 3 or 4 when there's profitability in the co-op. And you want to have a clear way, okay, by year 1 we'll be ready to elect a new board, and there'll be new members that can run for the board of directors. But yeah, usually it's that steering committee that becomes the founding board, and that's what you call it when it becomes a legal entity. Any other questions or suggestions?
I just wanted to echo what you were saying, Matt, about figuring out what you want and then trying to do all the legal and accounting work. We did not do that. And we're 9 months in and still backtracking and basically wasting money and having to sort of redefine things that we could have done in advance. So using all of the resources, especially through this federation, I just can't say enough how important I think that is, because I mean, I think this presentation answered a lot of the questions that if we had listened to it from the beginning, we would have maybe not screwed up so much, but we're moving forward.
Yeah, it sounds like you have an interesting, quite complex structure, and I hope that works for you. And yeah, consider simplicity as you're starting too. To maintain a multiple tier system is challenging, but that can bring great accountability to the community. If you have community ownership in your cooperative, it can bring real buy-in from the broader community and support. So yeah, that's definitely something to think about. There's a great question here from Frank about failed co-ops. Yes, there are many failed co-ops, and I can share many stories, just like there are so many failed small businesses, and I'd say fewer failed co-ops than I know of failed businesses, but and many of the same reasons, right? That they were undercapitalized, right? They were trying to build something and be competitive and in the market without having sufficient equipment or capitalization. That's a big one. Another area that's probably less common for co-ops, but an important one to think about is folks that are really trying to just do it on their own and not connecting to broader ecosystems. The good thing about the co-op community is that people are really willing to share as you get going. Other co-ops in your doing similar business, you can reach out and ask for sample documents from them all the time. We can help facilitate that through the federation. And that's really important to think about, like, how do you stay connected to other folks in your local area, region? And that's a big reason. People try to go on their own and don't make it because they haven't built up the broader supports. And then I've seen a lot of co-ops not get past that challenging moment of going from an entrepreneur with a strong vision to that shared vision, right? They never really gel that that founding team. They maybe bring on someone and it doesn't work and that person leaves, or they bring on some people and it's so slow going because there's so much else going on in people's lives that it doesn't get to the, operational arena. So really consider like being intentional about that shared vision process, bringing in an outside facilitator if you need to, uh, doing like a hiring process to bring on other folks into your core group. Do an interview. Do you share our vision on this? Do you have aspects to bring to the table that we're lacking and need at the table? Um, it's not do you want this job? It's do you want this shared ownership? And it's a very different kind of thing, um, but there are similar ways to go about it, and that intentionality is key. And let's see. Um, yeah, those are some I can think of, and if other people have examples they want to share, feel free. Um, and it's really, I've seen a lot of folks fail because they haven't built that, real revenue stream, right? Really built um, that added benefit, to your product or service that will be successful. You have a passion for doing the kind of work you're doing, but you can't build a sufficient market because you haven't listened to the needs or really, adapted to the needs of your industry for your product and service. Those are some of the ones I can think of. Conflict is another one, probably more common in co-ops than other companies, right? The implosion around severe conflict. So around that, I would say some of the things I was talking about, building those structures of accountability early on, of understanding how people want to be communicated with each other, um, and that kind of prevention is worth pounds of mediation in the future, but having a good structure in place for conflict mediation, having folks on hand that can facilitate that, being able to put a budget behind it, really encouraging folks to follow through in a full mediation process. Any other questions, comments? Marina?
I have a clarifying question about, I'm very new to all this still, and I'm not entirely clear about the difference between a worker self-led nonprofit and a co-op. And part of this is, I was told that a worker self-led nonprofit is not a co-op. However, it's advantageous because you can get what's that term? You
Tax
basically,
deductible.
yeah, tax deductible donations, and you can also apply for grants. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can speak to that, because we're kind of at this, like, what do we do? Which way do we go?
Yeah, that's an important one to consider, right? If you're in an area doing, a project, a mission-led project that is often supported by grants, are you considering a 501c3 nonprofit structure, or a nonprofit in your state? And so there's a few ways to think about that. When you're a nonprofit, you're a public charity, you are accountable to the public, right? When you're a co-op, you're accountable to the members. That's the main difference, right? So if you're staff-directed nonprofits are great democratic workplaces, and they're part of the movement, and they have a membership class in our federation, and that's a great thing. And that might be the right match for a group that will need substantial grant income or charitable donation income, and they want some independence to get those. Um, but that doesn't mean you can't be a co-op and have an affiliation with a nonprofit or a fiscal sponsor nonprofit that is doing that work in your area, that can hold that tax exempt kind of status for you and do those complicated 990 charity reports, um, and you know, you can hold your autonomy as a cooperative, and you could be contracted by that nonprofit to do the charitable work. That's a component of your. There's plenty of examples. There's pitfalls in that too. You know, you lose some autonomy to a certain degree if you're dependent on that grant funding. But yeah, there's a lot of things to consider around that, and relationship with another nonprofit and remaining a cooperative yourself is a great way to go. Or if you need to be your own nonprofit and get a 501c3 tax exempt status, get those grants, but you want to be democratic in your workplace, then there's great resources at the selc.org, you know, about how to structure that. And they are a nonprofit themselves, and they have great resources about how they set up their nonprofit dedicated to worker self-management.
So my company just dealt with this a lot too. And this was one of the things we wish we'd figured out prior to making all our decisions. We are, for our first year, are fully grant funded. And one of the important things to know, which we did not, is how many people have no idea how to work with a co-op, no idea how to deal with the structure of it, what the limitations are. You know, we were told by the head of this nonprofit, yeah, we're all in, the co-op thing is incredible, we really want to do this with you. And cut to a year later, because it took a full year to deal with this grant, they could not fund anything to do with the co-op. And we had to create an entire fiscal sponsorship project that was sort of outside of what our original plan was, but that we now have to fit everything into. So what we were sort of, what had been suggested to us was, if we had started a nonprofit from the get-go, and then after that was started, if we had then started a co-op and it was a member of the nonprofit, like they were both members of each other, that we would have been better off. But now that we're a for-profit cooperative, we can't really start a nonprofit afterwards, because now there are tax issues with that, where they're, you know, basically fraud and all that other stuff. So we had to find a fiscal sponsor to work with us, and we were fortunate enough to do that. But the biggest downfall of that is that we lost 5%, which is actually a low percentage. It's usually like between 5 and 10% of your grant. And we have to have all the limitations of that fiscal sponsorship project and have to report to the fiscal sponsor. So if you are, it sounds like whatever you're doing is within the realm of nonprofit land anyways, that probably won't be an issue for you. For us, it is. So, you know, I just wanted to sort of put that out there. And as well, make sure you're choosing banks that understand what a co-op is and prepared to just sort of educate people every day about what it means to be a co-op. And it becomes easier, and you almost sort of giggle every time somebody says, what do you mean by co-op? But those are things that I would suggest, and just understand.
Any other thoughts on that, or follow-up questions? There's often people ask how to find other folks to join their team, right? And there's no like surefire way to do that. We can maybe support, you know, at the Federation, connecting you with other people interested in co-ops in your area. We can do that in many areas, not everywhere. And a lot of people use social media, Facebook groups, things like that, to find people with common interest in the, you know, the area that you'll be forming your co-op in, and holding kind of general interest meetings to find like-minded folks. You know, I shared the example of people finding each other through a worker center. So maybe through some sort of movement organization or community-based organization in your area that is doing work around that and looking for a more sustainable, something that can be self-sustaining and be generating income for members in that constituent or community. Yeah, there's a directory on our website of other co-ops if you want to find them, and maybe you can help have other co-ops do outreach in your area. Yeah, if anyone else has ideas or suggestions around that for team building, that's a key component.
I have another question. You mentioned you're in Worcester.
Yeah.
Did you say that? Okay, so I'm in Western Massachusetts. I'm in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and one of the things that we're psychotherapists, and nobody can seem to answer whether psychotherapists with different licenses can co-own a business.
That's a very specific question that I can't really answer.
No,
but
that's fine. I'm just wondering if you have a sense of, because the co-op people can't help us with that question, and so and then nobody in our field knows about co-ops. And so we're like, well, who can answer this? I guess we have to find a lawyer who understands something about co-ops, but they're hard to find.
there are several in Western Mass, though. We
Okay.
can connect you.
Okay.
Or in Massachusetts in general, there's lots. And yeah, that would be my place to go. If you have a specific legal question about how to do something in your industry, how to set up, operating, there must be a way to do it. So again, like, say, this is what we want to do, this is why we want to share, and a lawyer who understands co-ops and has enough transactional law experience can help you set up a way of doing that. There might need to be a couple tiers of ownership or something like that, but more likely you'll you'll just find the legal mechanism to make that happen. There are other, professional service cooperatives around the country. So check that out on the website. You can, if you go to members, and then you can sort the directory, and one of the classes should be, professional services, and you can see the other, therapists and other folks who have formed co-ops around the country. You could reach out to them, see how they do it. If it's state specific, though, yeah.
It is very state specific because we have connections with two others, with therapist co-ops in 2 other states, and it's like it's really dealing with an intersection of the two is really challenging. Like, they're always like, well, what did you find out? What did you find out? But we'll reach out.
Yeah,
that'll
reach
be
out.
helpful.
We'll help you find a lawyer, get that question answered. And yeah, don't let someone say this is impossible. There's so many ways to figure that kind of thing out. Great. Well, if there are no more questions, if people have more questions, feel free to chime in. If not, we'll wrap up and share. Eric, do you have something?
Yeah, I got a quick question. I'm already thinking about succession planning in the startup phase, which is kind of funny, but I was curious, like, how does a cooperative think about succession planning? And you talked a little bit in the beginning about conversions of, like, kind of a traditional business model to a co-op, but what happens when a co-op or owners decide to end their membership? Like, what are some examples of that?
So 2 key components are leadership development, that those founders are not holding all the relationships and all the information in the cooperative, that there's active education and leadership development going on. So having a plan on how to do that and resource it in your co-op, that's great. You're thinking about it already early on. The other component is, the compensation, right? If those early folks have a lot of equity built up, how do you not bankrupt the co-op by, a bunch of those leaving at the same time and taking their equity out? And there's some great examples of the South Mountain Company in Martha's Vineyard that that dealt with that issue of substantial equity investments of early folks, and how to roll, build in mechanisms to start paying those folks out before they leave, and compensating founders in ways that are fair to, latecomers and, and the founders themselves. Usually, like in a traditional business, you're or a capitalist company that startup, you're not getting compensated for your idea in the very beginning. You're getting compensated when it's successful 2, 3 years, 4 years down the line, right? And the upside of it. And similarly, founders shouldn't be just compensated for their really early work, but also but really for the value that's generated in those years 3, 4, and that can be a good basis to figure out the right compensation. And it's a complicated situation on how to do it tax wise, but there are some great co-op accountants that can help you figure out the ways so that it's not tons of tax all at once. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's, you could talk for a long time about that, but I appreciate your insight there.
Well, thank you everyone for participating. We'll get you these slides and all the information, and feel free to reach out for the technical assistance session or just some resources as you need it. I'll put my email in the chat. Email me, and yeah, please spread the word about future events, and consider attending some of our other webinars and things. They'll be up probably in a month. We'll have a whole series of webinars we'll be doing in the summer and fall. Check back in. All right, take care.